Catherine McKenney. Welcome to the editorial board of the Ottawa Citizen. Thanks for joining us today. As you know and as you were forewarned, everything is on the record when you talk to the editorial board. The normal way we do this is we give you a minute or so to make an opening statement if you would like to, and then we'll just go sort of straight to our questions. We'll kind of go around until somebody's exhausted, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, I'll make a quick opening statement. My name is Catherine McKenney. I'm running for mayor for the City of Ottawa. I'm running to build a city that we can all be proud of, to reinvest in the services that we need in the city. We know it's a city with a tremendous amount of potential, and people are looking for a change in our city. So my plan really is to invest in housing, affordable housing, homelessness, transportation, transit, give kids 17 and under free transit, to start to rebuild our transit ridership, invest in the operations of transit. Certainly all of that ties into a strong climate action plan that I've put forward. We're in a climate crisis, and we have to take action now. So, in a nutshell, it's a bold and ambitious plan, but one that is also affordable, that I'm always excited to talk about.
Okay, we will get to some various elements of the plan itself then. I have a couple of political campaign-related questions to start you off. As we're getting into the last couple of weeks, things are beginning a little more heated between the candidates, shall we say. So one of your rivals has said that electing you would be a hard turn to the left, or that you would be the candidate of the hard left. That's the kind of vocabulary that has been used. Are you the candidate of the hard left? What are you?
Look, this campaign has really unfolded into two very clear visions. On the one hand, my plan is bold. It's it's a vision to reinvest in our city services. My opponent, Mark Sutcliffe, is proposing to cut up to $80 million in services that people rely on. So, in the end, my plan will save you money. Will save individuals, families money in the city by delivering the public services that we all rely on. I have a record as a city councillor for asking tough questions, for ensuring that people are the priority in all of our budgets, and I will continue to do that.
I'm not sure that completely answers the perhaps overly simplified label that got put on you there.
Yeah, it is. Well, let me put it this way. There's, our plans are both out today, and there's about a half-point difference in the two plans. But, my plan clearly saves you money. If you are a family with 2 kids, for example, 17 and under, it can save you up to $2,400 a year in transit costs. If we cut public services, if you can't afford to take a bus, if you have to hail a cab, if you don't have library services, for example, on Sunday to take your kids to, if you're fortunate enough to be able to go to a bookstore to purchase those books, that's there for you, but it's more expensive for you. So I would suggest that the plans are really very clear, and there's a very clear distinction between the two. And mine will ultimately reinvest in those services that we need, and will ultimately result in savings for people, for families, and will get you the services that you rely on every day, from busing to recreation to housing to libraries.
Okay, thank you. Bruce, did you want to carry on this theme a bit?
Sure. So much has been made of Council's dysfunction, particularly in the last term, with the Watson Club on one side and the so-called progressive or leftist, largely urban councillors on the other. Mayor Watson has repeatedly declared his is just one vote on council, but he's clearly shaped committees and boards to promote his platform. The first part of my question is, During your time on council, did you feel that you were outside looking in?
You know, Mayor Watson came in at a time in 2010 when we had just been through 4 years of a very inexperienced mayor, Larry O'Brien. There was much dysfunction, there was cleanup to be done, and he came in and people were looking for that type of stability. But, you know, over the last 8 years, I would suggest that, you know, what was missing from the council table was that that healthy discussion, that healthy debate into, you know, the services that we need. I'll give you a clear example. The LRT procurement, when we asked time and time again, you know, did the SNC Lavalin meet the technical requirements for you know, LRT Phase 2? And, you know, that question was never answered. You know, it takes away from our democratic process when you can't have debate, when you can't have that discussion. So, you know, in the end, you know, I will always stand up for residents that I represent. I will always stand up for the city that I believe that we can have, and whether that put me on, you know, what you would term the outside, you know, I think that for me, it's, you know, it was about leadership. It was about ensuring that I continued to ask those tough questions, and I would always do that.
My second part of the question is, your progressive agenda, if you became mayor, is certainly likely to alienate a lot of councillors, centrists and right of centre. So how do you include them and still accomplish the things you want to? And does your platform not risk creating a McKenney club?
No, if, you know, I've been across the city now for months, talking to people across the city, and very few people argue against better transit. People across the city understand that our transit system is in crisis. It doesn't work, it doesn't function. It can't get you where you need to go. It doesn't function within people's neighborhoods, certainly, and that is something that everywhere, whether it's Orleans, Stittsville, Barrhaven, people want transit to function within their neighborhoods. They want better recreation services. They want to be able to easily put their kids into recreation services, into swim lessons. So I would suggest that, you know, across the city, people are asking for the same thing, and people running for council across the city are hearing the same thing. So, you know, I believe that we will come into a new term of council. Of course, we have almost half of council will be new, so there will be new ideas, new focuses, but I'm confident that candidates for council today are hearing the same things that I'm hearing, and that they want a reinvestment in their services in the city.
But you have issues in your platform that many candidates or many councillors would likely not agree with. The bicycles, for example. So how do you get them on board, or do you have your vision for the city, so do you just railroad ahead and do that?
Again, you know, people in suburban communities, urban communities, rural villages, all want the same thing. They want a better transportation network. If you're a driver, you want to get yourself out of traffic. My transportation plan will help you get out of traffic by investing in cycle lanes, by investing in transit. Nobody, whether you're a driver, a cyclist, a pedestrian, wants a neighborhood where it's dangerous. It's dangerous for your kids to go cycle to visit their friends. Where, you know, if you're a driver, no driver wants to, you know, be in a situation where if a mistake is made, they're at risk of injuring or even worse, killing a cyclist. You know, the cycling plan that I put forward is cost neutral. It will, you know, not cost any more year over year into the budget than we're already spending today. But what it will do is it will, you know, we will be able to build that system that we need, that any modern city needs, in a shorter amount of time. And I'll give you a clear example. Stittsville just did its public realm study for its Main Street, and one of the things it identified, residents identified as wanting, was cycle lanes on Main Street in Stittsville. Well, right now there's no budget for that. That could take 5, 10, 15 years. And I heard from residents that that's disappointing. So to bring that up into the next, 4 years will address that, what has been established by residents of Stittsville is something that they want for themselves and for their families.
If I'm understanding you right, the question I think from Bruce was a little bit more about political culture, and a little less about your program itself. But what you're saying in response to him is, we won't have problems on council because people will see the reason of my platform. Right?
No, I guess what I'm saying is that, I'm guessing that people...
How do you keep it from becoming polarized?
Right.
I mean, on the one hand, you will
I
have,
understand,
let's say, I'll use a councillor, for example, Matt Luloff. He wrote us an op-ed, it's online, and it says, listen, the business of council is just to look after real basic stuff. That's what we do. We shouldn't be doing all these other things, whatever that might be. So that would suggest that you may be facing at least some of the former supporters of Mayor Watson who were in a kind of polarized situation with other members of council, whether it be Councillor Menard or Councillor Cavanaugh or Councillor Deans or yourself. So I think what we're looking for is to see which candidate, if any, kind of understands how to patch over that gap, or how to, how to fix it, how to make that work, so it isn't this nasty back and forth thing.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So we do have half of council coming in that will be new, and we do have existing councillors. In my term on council, I'll say this: I get along with my colleagues. I get along with Scott Moffat. Actually, he's one that I probably am most friendly with. Alan Hubley may not always agree, but we are friendly. I think the last term of council, certainly with COVID, being online, took away some of our ability to work with each other, to see each other face to face, and I do think that contributed to more divisive stances on issues. But we have both an opportunity. It's both a challenge and an opportunity with that many new councillors coming in. The opportunity is that they will come in with their ideas and things that they will want to get done. And absolutely, we have to have those discussions. And you don't need 24 councillors around the table plus a mayor if everybody just votes the same way, right? Like, we've got to be able to have those discussions, those debates. It's healthy for democracy. Do I think I'm going to win every vote? I don't believe that I will win every vote. But I do have the leadership skills. I have the experience with my existing colleagues to move forward on a clear vision for the city. But that also takes into consideration the needs of their wards, that no ward, that no area of our city is left out of that. And whether it's a rural village or an urban community or a suburban community, that's the role of a mayor, and that's what I will bring to the table.
All right, thank you. Nicole.
I want to pivot a little and talk about city finances. So your financial plan relies on revenue growth projections of 4.6% a year, with the 0.5% of that growth projected to be so-called free balance, from which you propose to fund a variety of priorities. But many economists are now projecting an economic contraction in the first quarter of 2023 and possibly through all of 2023, with the chief economist at Macquarie Group, for example, saying that the economy will actually contract by 3%, with unemployment rising about 5%. So my question is, what happens to your priorities if the projected growth of in-city revenue is in fact much smaller than what you've projected?
Mm-hmm. So we did, when we were looking at how we were going to build the plan, of course, we had the information that we had at the time, and we took into consideration growth at the time and inflation. And what was left over was that what we call the free balance. We were very careful not to go into the growth budget, because that's the funding that you need for meeting the needs of a growing population. So if we grow by 10,000 new residents, you need that money, you need that funding for that many more paramedics, that many more librarians. You know, that's what that budget does. So we were very careful that we left that in place. We also we're very conscious that things do change, and you can only, you know, look at the markers that you have available for you, you know, at that moment. But we left what I believe to be a healthy contingency that would address, you know, if in fact, you know, the economy contracts, or, you know, inflation does stay a little bit higher, or we do need some extra funding into, you know, some of our infrastructure. So that contingency fund was left there for that reason in particular.
Okay, did you do any kind of stress testing of the financial plan using scenarios that involved a contraction in city revenues?
No, at the time we built it on the information we had, which was the growth projections and the inflation projections from the bank. Inflation, of course, from the Bank of Canada.
Right,
yeah.
right. I also have a question about debt. So your plan to kind of build the city cycling infrastructure involves the issuance of kind of, you know, about $350 million in green bonds. With the cost of borrowing kind of expected to rise, with the Bank of Canada tightening its monetary policy, how can you kind of justify increasing the city's debt load kind of at this time?
Mm-hmm. So that green bond is very different than, say, the $332 million that is a debt being set aside for Lansdowne 2.0. The green bond will yield the investors less interest. So it does come in at a lower interest rate. That's, you know, if investors are looking to invest in green infrastructure, that's what it does. It provides that opportunity. We'll likely issue that probably in year 4 or maybe later. So able to take advantage perhaps of lower interest rates at the time. But also it is, you know, when we look at our cycling infrastructure, so we're very careful to ensure that what we were paying back, you know, over 25 years was the same amount that we're paying today, the $15 million a year. So we're not increasing our budget to fund this. But we also had to take into account, you know, what today, $15 million for cycling infrastructure, depending on what infrastructure you're building, gets you between 10 and 15 kilometers. It's not very much in a city that's got, you know, 6,000 kilometers of roadways. But in 15, 20, 25 years from now, you know, 15 million might get you 3 to 5 kilometers. So by, you know, investing in that today, you get more for your money, certainly for your investment, and then it's just paid back at the same rate or the same budget value that we would have anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just follow up with a couple of way more general questions than that?
Sorry.
So, as a voter, I'm confused. I hear candidate Shirelli come out and say, "You need me in charge of the city because our debt is horrendous. Our finances are in terrible shape. You know, it's just they showed me the books. It's awful. It's awful. Is it awful?"
No, when we talk about debt, you know, I think one of the most important things is to be transparent about where your debt is, what it's financing. Now, I'm going to go back to the $332 million for Lansdowne 2.0. You know, that was a decision that was supposed to be made after extensive consultation with the public. We had an entire process laid out. It never happened. I'm not opposed to Lansdowne. I just don't know what people want. I don't think people have ever been asked, you know, what do you want to see at Lansdowne? What are you willing to invest as a city? You know, so when we look at debt like the debt that, you know, to smart debt that would help us to, you know, take all of our city buildings and retrofit our city buildings to, you know, to realize energy savings. We know that in 8 years, we're going to start it will have paid off, and we will have that funding actually freed up. We will have less energy costs in all of our city buildings. So there are different types of debt, and I think that it's really important that our budget and understanding debt, even for us to understand where our debt was and what it was difficult. It's, our budgets, the information around our financing at the city, even how much is in our cycling budget, is very difficult to understand. It's been made very opaque, I think on purpose, so that, people don't understand what we actually can do for them.
Well, I'd agree. I'm certainly one of those. But what you're saying then is it's less about whatever the number is and more about what that debt is going into. If it's going into something that we believe is going to get paid back, whether it's energy retrofits, whether it's people off the roads because of cycling, whatever it might be, that is a more acceptable sort of debt or a more rational kind of debt to be in than...
I believe it's a smarter debt, and I believe that if we are open about our debt, what it means, what the return on it is, and allow it, any money that we spend is your money, it's your tax dollar. And we haven't done that. So I think it's both. I think you have to be careful about debt. Obviously, you have to pay it back. Debt financing can be expensive, but you also have to be honest about debt. And there is smart debt.
Can I ask you one other thing? I'm going to pass to Taylor right after this, but you've talked about getting more public input into, obviously, setting the budget. I presume you can't do that for 2023. You wouldn't have time. Is that fair?
2023 budget will occur. 2023 budget will occur, and the 2024 budget will both occur in 2023. We're going to have two budgets in the same year. It will be more difficult to get input. It will happen quicker, but we still can. It's not going to. We will have all of December and January, but certainly going forward, we have to find a much better way of consulting the public on our budget.
So is it cart before the horse to say to the public, I already know what the property tax increase is going to be, what the ceiling is going to be, before I've actually consulted you about any of this?
The plan that I put forward, I think that any serious candidate would put forward, would have to be costed. And with that costing, you would know what your projected budget increase or tax rate would be. Mine comes in at 3%. It's quite clear how I arrived at the current tax approach of 3%. But then there's, I guess we can't confuse that with the actual budget process. And the budget process is a time when we look at the needs of each department. If there are savings to be had, say in one department, that can be reinvested into other services that we know are in pretty critical need of investments, then we'll do that then. But those are the discussions that we have to have prior to that budget landing on the council table and pretty much finalized before there's any real input into it. Yeah.
Taylor.
I want to go back to the cycling infrastructure just because it's a major part of your platform, and a lot of questions have been brought up by competitors or others during the campaign. So can you explain to voters, how we get there's debt that's going to be issued for this construction's done. How does it get paid for? 4 years worth of construction to get this thing done. Where does the money for that come from? Because it hasn't been laid out in your financial plan. And then, are you confident that we have sufficient capacity to actually construct this? We hear about labor shortages or other challenges, supply chain issues. Do you really think it's possible to deliver on all of that in 4 years? And then one last part of that question. So for this to be cost neutral, for 25 years, you're saying spend $15 million to service the debt and the interest.
Yes.
So to keep that cost neutral, no additional spending on even more cycling infrastructure. We just pay this down, and what we have is what we have.
Mm-hmm. 3 parts.
3 parts.
I'll try to remember them
It's
as we go
fine.
along.
I can
Yeah, that's
revisit.
okay. So the funding comes from the $250 million when we issue that debt. Right now, we've got reserves that we can use up until the point that you issue that debt. So you do have time to, between when you start and when you issue the debt, where you can wait for lower interest rates, where you can, find the best time for that type of investment. So it is a green bond. It is a bond that we would issue. We did that for our LRT. I think we were the first city actually in Canada to issue a green bond for green transit. So it's the same type of funding mechanism. Second part of that question, other cities are doing it. Cities around the world, cities in Canada, they're building the needed infrastructure. They recognize that we've got to keep people, give people a choice in how they travel. People have a right to get around by bike, no matter where they live. Kids are going to travel. They're going to hang out with their friends. They're going to go to school. They're going to take a bike. They have a right. We have an obligation to keep people safe. It's just about building the infrastructure really that keeps people safe when they're out on their bike. It also is, again, an advantage to drivers. No driver wants to be in a situation where, a mistake made by a kid on a bike or anyone on a bike results in their death. Nobody comes out of that scenario unscathed, whether it's your fault or not. When you're a pedestrian or cyclist, you have a right to make a mistake and not have it result in catastrophic injury or death. So building the cycling infrastructure, cities are doing it everywhere, and they are doing it aggressively, and we've seen that, and we haven't, and I firmly believe that we can. Over 4 years, build out the missing links and the networks that are already identified in our master plan, our transportation master plan. The third part of that, yes, absolutely. So, and this was something that I considered very carefully because we built it. It's in our transportation master plan. It's part of our official plan. It's actually part of our climate plan. It's actually more money identified in our climate plan than $250 million, but it is part of our climate plan that we endorsed unanimously as a council, and it had this type of cycling investment into cycling infrastructure in it. So when we pay that back, $15 million a year, which is what we're spending today, are there going to be opportunities to do more? I trust that there probably will be. I think that our federal partners, provincial governments, in the past and today are investing in active transportation. We can always, take advantage of that. But what we will have is a very secure and a very ambitious and a world-class cycling network. I think it gives us the opportunity for other cities to compare themselves to Ottawa.
We've heard your opponent, Mark Sutcliffe. He's criticized your spending plan as, he talks about raiding the reserves, and we're hearing that even in just the short term, you will be plan to take money out of there to pay for this, that you're going to pull down another $90 million. That's not going to get repaid. He said we don't know what we could encounter, extreme weather events, other unexpected financial situations, just the general economic uncertainty of our time right now, and it's not responsible to be doing this. What's your response to that?
So first off, this isn't to raid the reserves. This is, being able to use those reserves until we have the bond in place. So the reserves pretty much stay, aren't taken out, aren't removed. The $90 million use of reserves is exactly what we should be doing. We are, families are feeling the pinch. People, are worried about their own finances. And this is a time when cutting back on city services hurts people. If you pull money out of services, it has to come out of city services. It will come out of libraries. It will come out of recreation services. It will come out of transit services. I don't know anybody who would argue today that we have sufficient investments in those services at the City of Ottawa. So that $90 million is you know, a portion of the excess that we have in reserves. There is a certain, you know, amount that, you know, is agreed upon by financial experts. It's like 8.5 to 9.6. I'm kind of pulling that out, but I think it's around there. We have 15% in excess reserves. So what we're using is a portion of those excess, that's the 90 million, to address inflation. So that, because without that, then you have, your choices are higher taxes or less spending on services. So it's actually the right thing to do.
To that point, you know, you haven't proposed to reduce any of our current spending as a city. Again, your opponent has portrayed that as giving up. Today we heard giving up on finding savings for Ottawa taxpayers. Do you not believe that there's anywhere we're spending as a city where we shouldn't be, or not to the extent we are today?
There's always places to find excess spending. You know, the Porsche dealership is probably the best example, but there's always places to find some excess. Certainly not up to $80 million. I've been around that table. I understand the budget well enough to know that $80 million is serious cuts to our service. But when we're budgeting, you know, if there's savings to be found in one area, of course we will look for those. We'll always look for some efficiencies. But to suggest that today we wouldn't just reinvest those in transit, in paratranspo, that never shows up for people, in recreation services, our recreation centers open later and later every budget round. You know, we don't have the swim lessons that we need. Francophone parents have a hard time getting their kids into, you know, the recreation services in the language of their choice. You know, any savings that we find, we will reinvest in the services that save you money in the end by delivering good public services that people count on. You know, providing transit for free for kids 17 and under. You know, it's probably the most significant way that we can make life more affordable for families. If you've got 2 kids, that's, you know, $200 a month. There's not much more a city can do to make life more affordable for families than that.
How did you get here today?
I drove.
You drove? Because our bike paths are so...
Yeah, well, yeah, I have to say, I drive. You know, I drive, well, more regularly than I used to, certainly. But, you know, I drive. I take transit when I can. I probably use all modes of transportation in one day. I think most people do. I think most people either walk and take a car, or take transit and cycle, or, you know, cycle and drive. Like, it's not one or the other. It's, you know, we really have to consider, like, you know, a day in the life of anyone, or a day in the life of any family, and how people, you know, move about. Yeah.
That's a fair answer. Can I just ask you, we didn't even talk about asking this, but I'll ask you, because the city's rental e-scooter program wraps up, right?
Right.
In November. And I just wonder what you would be concluding about that program. This is like the second or third year it's been kind of a pilot, so-called pilot program.
Yeah.
What have you seen with that?
So when it first entered Ottawa, it came with much fanfare, and I could understand why. It's kind of fun to go around on an electric scooter. But they were left on sidewalks. People were riding them on sidewalks. I was hearing, especially from seniors, like many times every day, you know, about close calls, scooters. CNIB was in touch with me several times about people who had visual impairment and the dangers of, you know, possibly tripping over scooters that were being left on the sidewalk. So after the first pilot, I think I was the only one who said no. It's not that I didn't want to see them. Micromobility is, you know, is a good thing. It's a healthy way of getting people around the city, but, you know, we have to hold these companies to account. And I was told there's no way you can get them off the sidewalks. We can't geofence that closely enough. I disagreed. Year 2, there were more of us that said no, because, you know, it was spreading out, and more people were hearing from residents. And we took the feedback from CNIB and other groups quite seriously. And this summer, I have to say, there were less of them, and the launch was pushed back until they really were able to geofence off of sidewalks, and it's worked. I haven't had many complaints about them. They have more specific parking areas, so they're not just left on sidewalks, and you're not seeing, and we're not seeing the people riding them on sidewalks.
So if you become mayor, do you think back this program going forward?
Based on what we saw this year, absolutely, I could see making it more permanent. Yes.
Great, thanks. Blair, we're still on transit here. Do you want to jump
in? Yes. LRT question.
It could be micro-transit. But
yeah. More macro transit, but in your policy for transit, I mean the fare-free rides for kids under 17 gets most of the press, but you also said that you want to bring LRT maintenance under the city's control, away from RTTM. And what makes you think the city would be able to do a better job at that than RTM, and do you think it's feasible that you can do that?
So when you think about the history of our transit system, it's not functioned well. It's not functioned nearly as well as residents should expect it to. We're now, we've had 2 serious derailments, many times that it's shut down. Winter's particularly difficult, but so is the heat. So right now the city is in court, arguing for that RTM is in default. If that court case comes back, where we have options, and one of them is, I call it a low-cost option to bring that maintenance in-house, I do believe that we can do a better job than RTM has been doing. We've had to bring in expertise. That's TRA has had to come in to oversee what is almost the tightening of nuts and bolts on a train that we paid $2.1 billion for. In the past, I'm not comparing them directly, but in the past, with our Trillium line, even though it's heavy rail, our original Trillium line was not a P3. It was a Bombardier train. We had Bombardier, engineers in, but it was our city staff. We had the expertise at the city to oversee the maintenance. And it worked. It was one of the highest functioning trains anywhere. So I do believe that we can bring it in-house if, in fact, we get that option, and that we can hire the expertise for the same amount of money that we're paying RTM. And then you have more accountability over the maintenance.
In a somewhat related question, you're advocating for e-buses to accelerate that and use that more with OC Transpo. But we saw they're kind of untested in our climate, and we know the hazards of that from the Alstom train and what happened with LRT. So what makes you think that that's a good idea to rush into e-buses when it was problematic with LRT?
So with the e-buses, a couple of things. They have been used in other cold climates, so it's not a brand new type of bus, the same as the Alstom Spirit was, brand new train that had never been tested. But we also have the Auditor General's report. I think that was really quite smart of Council to ask for an AG's assessment of the purchase and how we move forward with that purchase. So, it's slowed it down a little bit, but I think it's, given our experience with the LRT, I think that it's the prudent way to move forward. But, after a year, testing the electric buses, to move forward with more is, it is the only way that we're going to, really reduce our greenhouse gases in our own fleet of buses.
Can I ask you one other thing about transit before we move to other topics? This isn't really about transit. Well, it is. It's about people who've driven their cars like I do a bit too much. There was a lot of confusion in the last few weeks about parking charges and what you would do in the core because of some of the things that had been said by other candidates. Why don't you just clear that up for us right now? Tell us what you want to do with parking charges in Ottawa.
So parking charges are not part of my transportation plan at all. So, there was some confusion.
There are many who think they are.
Yes, there was some confusion. Another candidate had suggested quite an increase in parking in the downtown. That headline wasn't attributed to anyone, so it was assumed that it was me. I have absolutely no intention of raising parking to $9 an hour, or whatever it was that Mr. Bay had suggested. What I did go on to say was this. So the question to us was, would you support, shutting down the downtown to cars? And, my response to that was, no, you can't, cities who have been able to do that have got very robust, very effective, very affordable transit systems. We don't. So you can't. You can't give people no options to come into a downtown, of course. And then I referred to a study that had been done that showed that, congestion charging, was best addressed through, increases in parking levels. But that was just a reference to a study. It is not in my transportation plan, and I have no intention of raising parking fees in the downtown.
You're not going to raise parking fees?
No.
Okay, that's what we're hearing.
No.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Marco, do you want to throw anything in here? Or we're going to
Actually,
shift
yeah.
topics in a sec. So
The other week, I moderated a debate in Finley Creek, and one thing I thought was interesting was all four candidates there were in unanimous agreement that the bike lane proposal, fare free transit, weren't proposals that would be effective in Finley Creek. Now, you mentioned earlier that you spoke to, or you saw that in Stittsville that bike lanes were something that were wanted by residents. So I'm just thinking, though, considering some of the rhetoric we're hearing and maybe it's perception versus reality, what would you say to critics who say that this plan that you're putting forward, these are things that are helpful or beneficial mostly to urban residents and don't speak to the experiences of people living in the suburbs or in rural communities?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly the money that families will save for fare-free transit for kids 17 and under will benefit people living across the city, and probably more so in suburban communities. We have many, many families that move out to our suburban communities. So, that will save families money. Anytime I talk to any family, about that, they understand that it is a significant savings for them, yearly, monthly savings for them. In terms of the investment into safe cycling, again, it is part of our official plan. It's part of our climate plan. It was unanimously approved by council that we have to invest in safe cycling infrastructure if we want to give people options to move about the city in a different way. And, if we want to get people out of traffic, there's also a lot of discussion about traffic. I got here with only 2 minutes to spare because of traffic. And the only way to do that, the only way to get drivers out of traffic is to have more people take transit, have more people walk, have more people cycle when they can. Nobody is at all is suggesting that there should only be one mode of transportation, but you have to give people choices.
So you're not declaring war on cars?
No. Not declaring war on anything. It's just not my way.
Marco, did you have a follow-up there?
Yeah, I just elaborate on that a bit. I think more generally, if we can kind of frame this out in a way, how would you address people who maybe are concerned that you won't represent their interests because you are a councillor who represents an urban ward on council?
Yeah. Well, I've lived in Canada. I've been in Canada for years, and I actually worked for the councillor in Canada, addressing people's needs in Canada. I was very good at it. And so I do understand the needs of suburban communities. I've lived through that. I've addressed those needs through my work in a suburban community. And whether you're looking at needs of Canada, Glencairn, Stittsville, parts of Orleans, downtown community, or a rural village. Really, the needs are, there's some differences, but they're pretty much all the same. People want a sense of community. People want to live in a neighborhood that they're proud of. People want to be able to meet their neighbors. People want to be able to walk to a corner store, or to be able to cycle to a library. That is a shared kind of vision across this city. And I always subscribe to the fact that we really are much more similar than we are different.
Okay. Bruce, we'll spring back to you here.
One thing I haven't heard you talk much about is policing. I know you wrote a letter recently about choosing a new police chief, but I think it's the shape, size, and budget of Ottawa Police Services is a significant issue, especially with what happened in January and February. So what is the direction you'd like to see the force take, and how are you going to get there? And I know in the past you've talked about that defunding the police. So money.
Oh, I've never talked about defunding.
Well,
the
you've
police.
talked about taking money for like mental health issues and
Out of the increase that was being sought, yes.
to go elsewhere.
Yes, but not. I've certainly never
Nobody
said
wants
defund.
to touch that expression.
No, absolutely. Well, I've just never said it.
Okay. So I'm just. How do you propose? What do you want in the OPS? How do you propose to get there?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that another candidate has said that he will sit on the board. Are you planning on doing that?
Yeah, I've stated that weeks ago that I would sit on the Police Services Board. Look, nobody understands the need for effective policing like I do. After what the community I represent lived through in February, we called for effective policing, and we were left without effective policing for weeks. The issue around policing has got to be done openly and honestly. First off, I've asked for the hiring of the police chief to be put off until we have a new council. I think that is key, that we have our former police chief who identified at the commission in the inquiry into the Emergencies Act, state that he resigned because he felt that there was a loss of trust in policing, in his ability to lead the force. Going forward, we need a mayor who will take their place at the board. I have stated that a couple months ago and more recently, but also one who will work with the chief, work with police to understand what the needs are in terms of evidence-based policing. If you're asking for another 30 million, 35 million, we've got to ask, how does that lead to safer communities? We know that Ottawa police, when their tasers reach the end of their warranty, they give them to other police services. Last time they gave them for free to Peterborough Police Service. We just took them and used them because they were perfectly good. We've got police who are expected to do things like, fingerprinting, booking, standing around, traffic sites. Are there efficiencies to be found? Are there ways that we can, take some of that increase that police are asking for and reinvest it into social services, into upstream services, into mental health services? We see it every day. People are suffering in this city. We've got a raging opioid crisis. We've got a homelessness crisis. We've got people who are precariously housed, people who are hanging out, Rideau, King Edward. And really, we've come to a place where the only option often is calling police if somebody is having, mental health breakdown. And it's not fair to police either. As we've decreased our funding into social services over the last 2 decades, we've turned to police to fill that gap, and we can't continue to do that. We've got to ask the tough questions when any department, including police, come to us and ask for a 3% increase. And we've got to ensure that the investments we're making will actually reduce crime. And what reduces crime, it's been shown, is investing in upstream services, in recreation services for youth, in good youth services, victim services. That is where we need the investments to actually reduce crime. Police respond to crime. We're always going to need police to respond to crime, but they don't prevent crime, and that's what we have to be thoughtful and intentional about whenever we set our budgets and invest in our city services.
So are you inclined to, sorry, are you inclined
I'm
to
getting all enthused there.
Are you, me too. Are you inclined to then hold the line on increases to police budget?
I'm not inclined to holding the line. What I am inclined to doing is, as we move forward with our budgets, if 3% is a large, amount of money going into a budget that is $380 million. What I'm inclined to do is to invest that into real community safety and well-being. So to reapportion a part of that increase into the types of services that we need that will reduce crime.
So how would any of the things you're saying, investing in these upstream services, how would that have helped us in a situation like last January and February? I mean, I think, you know better than we do how raw that still is with people. And on the one hand, everyone is talking about the police did not clamp down and do what we think is traditional police work during that period. On the other hand, you're talking, and many people are talking, experts, about, but we need the upstream mental health services and all these other things. I don't understand how those two things go together to help us prevent a recurrence of that nightmare. Do they?
What we needed in January, February was a significant increase in police presence in this city. So we're not going to, we needed 2,000 police officers in this city to shut down what was happening. So you don't hire 2,000 extra police officers just in case you have another convoy. What happened in January, February, a couple of things. One is, it was a national protest. It was a result of a convoy that came in, that wanted to overthrow our federal government. They didn't make much of a secret about that. So our entire police force was focused on Wellington Street, was focused on Parliament. And as a result, what happened was the abutting residential areas were left without any security, without any of our local police. Our local police could not respond. Once the trucks came in and occupied our city the way they did, our local police force was not capable of responding to that. We needed the RCMP, we needed the OPP. It's what I called for. I called for it for 3 weeks, as soon as they didn't leave on that first Monday. It wasn't, we needed that quick coordination that we just weren't getting. So if anything, it was our local police, having to, respond to the Hill, which is why we've called for, and I've asked for, and it's happening, at least it's being studied, that Wellington Street and maybe Sparks and Metcalfe and O'Connor will become part of the parliamentary precinct, so that any, large demonstrations that are focused on, our our parliament will be addressed through other police services.
Did you have follow-up there, since I just butted in?
No, but I thought you might want to go on to Wellington Street.
I might. We've asked a few of these questions before, as you can tell. What about Wellington Street? Can you envision it ever reopening as either to traffic or in any other capacity? I mean, do you have in your own head any kind of a vision for what that should be, or are we just going to sit there with bollards at both ends of it forever?
I don't envision it ever opening again to vehicular traffic. I could see light rail, trolley running down it, certainly to move people, over from, Gatineau into Ottawa and, up and down Wellington Street. We have an opportunity, it will likely get turned over to the parliamentary precinct. It will likely become a federal roadway. But definitely we can't just leave it with bollards and a few annuals out there. There's so much that you can do with an area in front of your parliament to animate it, to bring people down to that area, to make it an exciting place.
But under what you're saying, the city wouldn't be the one making that decision.
Well, if it's not ours, it wouldn't be the city making the decision. But I could see that the federal government, that it's a perfect opportunity to invest in that public realm in front of Parliament to make it a much more exciting place and a place that will draw people into the area.
A reader asked me this question. You've sort of answered it, but I'll just put it to you the way it came into me was, if you were mayor, what would you have done differently during the convoy?
I would have stood up and demanded action. I would have been out on the street. I would have, visited residents who were suffering. I would have certainly been there when people needed me. It was a very difficult time not to have others speak out as well. It's what we needed. We needed other leaders to come out and to demand that the federal government step in, that the province declare a state of emergency, so that we got the resources that we needed, from the OPP and eventually the RCMP. I certainly would have never made any type of deal with Tamara Leach or any of the other organizers in the convoy.
I'm sorry, I just missed that last part.
Sorry, I would have never made any type of deal with organizers of the convoy. That certainly was,
Okay, just want to make sure I got that properly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very different topic, but a quick question about the urban boundary. So you've said you've committed to maintaining our current urban boundary, but you know very well, obviously, that council has already made that decision to expand our boundary, and the only way that we're reversing that is if the province allows us to do, which, there's essentially no way they're going to, as I see it. You may feel differently, but how is it not misleading voters to include that in your platform?
Well, I've always been clear that I don't agree with any expansion of the urban boundary. I do believe that the province has not has not approved our official plan. I do feel strongly that they are going to, reject the Taywin-Taggart lands that will be exceptionally expensive for, residents today and in the future. Tens of millions of dollars every year is what it would cost us to have people, a whole new community built out in that part of the part of our city. So it's, I would commit if, obviously the province has the final say, whether it's now after the decision's been made or any decision that we do make that falls under the Planning Act. The province always has the ability to overrule that but still I maintain that as a mayor I would commit to maintaining the current boundary. If I'm able to, obviously. Yeah.
So how is that? how is that democratic philosophically for you to say, on the one hand, council made a decision. I didn't like it, but council made a decision. But now I desperately, really, really would like the Ontario government to overturn that decision, and probably you may be asking them to, for all I know, or through various channels at Queen's Park. I don't understand.
I don't have any contacts at Queen's Park.
I don't understand someone who I think would like to have or project the idea of accountability and transparency and openness and democracy. You know, the last council made a decision, you don't like it, so now you want it overturned by Dad.
You know, it is up to the province in the end to approve our official plan. It is my sincere hope that they don't, that they remove the Taywin-Taggart lands. It will result in a significant financial pressure on residents of this city if we expand with a community that large, that far away from our existing services. So, you know, I've always been clear that I don't support it, and I'm hopeful that the province doesn't support it either.
Can I just ask you along the same lines of what one might want to do democratically and what one might not? I think you're on record saying that the strong mayor powers don't interest you. I think the other candidates are too. Is there any circumstance under which you can think that you might try to make use of those powers, particularly because the province has, you know, suggested that their appropriate use is around things like housing, and obviously housing is a big priority for you, as it is for many, I think. But any circumstances where you can conceive of that, or are you absolutely ruling it out, taking it off the table, saying, no way, voters, I will never use that power?
Yeah, I've been very clear that I find that legislation to be truly undemocratic, and that I would not use those powers. Yeah.
Thanks. And sorry, Taylor. No, go ahead. I was gonna.
Just one more vote.
Yeah.
Obviously, housing, big part of your plan, especially chronic homelessness, keeping people struggling to afford their housing housed, moving them out of homelessness. But, you know, not anyone, but many people that are trying to get into the housing market as buyers, obviously really struggling in a lot of cases, or thinking down the road and just how could I possibly be able to afford a home? You know, you said you're going to pursue Ottawa's fair share of the federal housing accelerator fund. Obviously, you know, no guarantees about what we'll get from that, but I don't see any other kind of funded commitments related to affordability for buyers. Why is that?
The city doesn't have, you know, any input into home purchases. We don't, you know, we have no control over interest rates, over inflation. We can, you know, assist in, you know, the development of more housing stock, certainly, whether it's $10,000 a year or $12,000 a year. That is the city's role. Again, I go back to that is exactly why, when I was considering my transportation plan, my transit plan, that I decided to make transit free for kids 17 and under, because that is a very direct way that we can help families with affordability. You know, 2 kids, $200 a month. That, you know, that adds up to almost, you know, depending on your property taxes, it could be almost 50% of your property tax bill. You know, the city doesn't, you know, doesn't have, you know, any input into home buyership. It is, you know, we can do what we, you know, we can accelerate the process to build more housing, to, you know, cut down on some red tape, but, you know, that there's no funding requirement beyond that.
And we have seen both Bob Shirley and Mark Sutcliffe talk about, you know, development charge relief, application fee relief, trying to incentivize. And you know, there are lots of people out there that will argue that supply is a part, or a big part, depending on who you ask, of addressing, you know, housing affordability challenges, and that municipalities do have a lot of power in that regard. And then we are seeing these promises from your competitors. I don't think any of those are in your platform. Why not?
So development charges are required whenever we build new communities to build the amenities that we need to go with those communities. If we remove development charges from housing, it means that existing residents end up paying for those new recreation centers, end up paying for the new fire stations, the new paramedics, and housing just becomes less affordable for everyone. You know, your taxes have to go up. Somebody has to pay. Development charges pay for growth. Growth doesn't really pay for growth today, but it needs to pay for most of the growth, the expense of growth. Once you start removing development charges, things become much more unaffordable for everybody in the city.
Can you say at this point how many terms you would serve as mayor if elected?
Oh, I can't imagine. If I'm elected and if I'm fortunate enough to be reelected, I would not serve more than 2 terms.
Hard commitment on that?
Yeah.
Why?
Hard commitment.
Why?
You know, it's being mayor is a tough job. Being mayor is a tough job. You know, I would come in with what I feel is a very bold vision and a very specific, vision for the city. I think that it would take 4 to 8 years to start to see that vision unfold and see the city, change into the type of city that people want to see it change into. But after 8 years, not for a councillor. I think at the council level, it's different. I think that being a councillor for longer than 2 terms, you still have a lot of energy. But being mayor is a big job, and I mean, for myself, I would turn it over to someone else after 8 years. Yeah.
Bruce?
I noticed some things in your platform to me seem a little aspirational without details. And one that struck me was you promised to go on an international trade mission to find 1 or 2 as yet unspecified major employers of highly skilled workers to relocate to Ottawa. How does that work? What do you have in mind? I mean, do we just pack a bag and drive you to the airport and then wait?
Whether it would be me going on the trade mission or someone else. But, I think that when we look at our economic development in the city, we haven't attracted a lot of large employers that pay a good living wage, certainly. And, to be able to do that, we need a city that's got world-class transit. We need a city that, has addressed its homelessness emergency. We need a city that has, addressed its climate emergency. We need, a city with good public services to attract and retain any type of, talent. But we also need to go out and attract those companies to our city that can bring in good paying jobs, that can bring in, green jobs, that can bring in different types of expertise. And we haven't done that over the last, decade. And I would suggest that that cities that get those types of employers go out and do that.
Certainly Mayor Watson has tried to do that. He has done international trade missions pre-COVID back in those days.
Yeah.
I don't know how successful we've been. In fact, we've lost sort of Shopify basically here.
Yeah.
So why are you the potential mayor who can bring these people in?
It goes back to the type of city that we would be able to offer people. And if you can offer people a world-class city, when you talk to young people in this city, when you talk to new employers, to get good talent in our city, if we're going to try and attract somebody from Montreal, if we're going to try and attract somebody from Vancouver, we've got to provide this, the amenities that bring them here. And it is much better cycling infrastructure. It is better nightlife. It is better housing. It is better transit so that people can move around by bus. No, whenever people go to visit Vancouver, they always come back and tell you how easy it was to get around everywhere, whether it's by SkyTrain and transit. You know, when they go to Montreal, they come back, they talk about how they can get around by bike, by Bixi. Those are the types of things that, attract people to our city.
So is your trade mission going to happen towards the end of your second term?
Not necessarily. It can happen in the first term. I think that once we start making those investments, I think that it is, very likely that we'd be able to attract, one or two good employers, larger employers that pay a good living wage.
Could I ask you, I know we're getting a little bit to the end of time and you've been very generous with it, but there are a couple of things in your platform that kind of look like they're meant to grab the headlines without necessarily being obvious how they're going to help us. Why do we need a chief climate officer? Why do we need a chief architect? Those just seem like big bureaucratic titles. They're meant to impress. Really? Do we really need these people?
So I'll give you an answer for both because it's both different. Yes. Yes. So chief climate officer, what we've have at the city today is we have a lot of very smart people working on different parts of our climate plan. But they don't always intersect when you need them to. You know, our climate plan has got cycling infrastructure in it. It's got transit. It's got electrified buses. It's got, investments into retrofitting, energy retrofitting our city buildings. But, when we start talking about, development, planning and development, where we're building our recreation centers, how we're doing that, to have a chief climate officer that would oversee and have responsibility to ensure that we are moving forward on that climate plan. We haven't invested in it. We've had very little investment in the climate plan. We don't get, serious reporting back, and it's all done in silos. So a chief climate officer would work to ensure that all those pieces are moving together. It's critical. We've got to meet our climate goals. On the chief architect, so I'll give you an example of how a chief architect works. In Edmonton, they hired a chief architect, and within a few years, they won, and it would be a chief architect who's responsible for public buildings. Right? Within a few years, they won an award for one of their new public buildings, and people take pride in that. Right? I remember I spoke to the chief architect, and he said within another year or two, people were looking for another award. People take pride in their city winning awards for their architecture, for their public buildings. They're now, he's now responsible for public parks. So, what is the best way to build our public parks? And the way it works is, it intersects with procurement. So when we, for example, build a new central library or any large building, we know what it's going to cost. But today what we do is we go out and we, in our procurement process, we give highest marks to the lowest bidder. Right? So we're not incentivizing great architecture. So what they do in Edmonton is they know what a central library, for example, will cost. And they go out and they say, here's what it's going to cost. You come back and tell us what you can build for this. And if you come in a little bit above or a little bit below, you might lose a few points. So if you're, if you can, it incentivizes architects everywhere to come in at that price, but it's not the lowest price. You don't get bonus points for decreasing the cost of your building. And the result is better architecture, a better procurement process, better value for your money. We know that the cheapest rather is not always the least expensive. We've been through that with our LRT. And I believe that having a chief architect would do both things. It would provide us pride in our public buildings, our public spaces, and it would also lead to a much better procurement process that would eventually, save us money.
Okay. Taylor, anything else from you? No. Marco?
No.
Blair? Bruce? I'm debating whether to ask you the other 55 questions that are here or not to.
Where would you put the sixth bridge?
That's, I don't know that I would, that's a tough one. There is no easy answer to transportation, large trucks in our downtown, but they're rolling through a part of our downtown that is probably one of the lowest income parts of our downtown. Two reasons why you have trucks coming into the downtown. One is just cross-border, and for cross-border traffic, we've got to find a way of getting them out of the downtown. It's just not allowing them to come into the downtown. They've got to bypass the city if they want to get over to over to Quebec. But the other piece is trucks coming in to deliver goods in our city, and for that we've got to look at how we would establish depots on the outer edges of the city, and then sending in smaller vehicles, smaller electric vehicles into the different neighborhoods, into the businesses that require those goods. But we just can't continue to let big trucks rumble through our downtown.
So on the bridge, the answer is, I don't know.
Well, it's certainly, I'm not a proponent of building another bridge. Do I think we'll ever get the funding to build a multi-billion-dollar tunnel? No. I think that would be my easier answer, but it's not going to be an easy solution, but we do have to find a solution for both of those reasons why large trucks enter our city. Yeah.
Was this a follow-up?
No.
Well, I'm just going to ask one
No,
other
for you.
non-related question, but coming back to, you talked about the Taywin lands and the urban boundary and so on. Do you have, I don't see in your platform, it may be there, but do you have a strategy or an approach you want to take toward reconciliation in the city as mayor? This is one thing that I think Mayor Watson was attempting to do with success here and maybe not in other places, but there was what looked like a visible attempt to further reconciliation at the urban level.
Absolutely. When we talk about reconciliation at a municipal level, we cannot talk about land use, we cannot talk about our waterways without considering, the impact that has had on Aboriginal people in this entire area. We have moved forward with some small gestures of reconciliation at the city, recognizing certain landmarks, for example, on Spark Street, where, some of that history unfolds, opening council with, Indigenous elders being involved. But if we're going to, I think as a city, the most impactful thing we can do to reconcile for our history with Indigenous people is to end chronic homelessness. 35, probably 40% of people who live in shelters are Indigenous. And we've left them there for often years. And they are grossly overrepresented. I think they make up 5% of the population in Ottawa, and at least 35% of our shelter population. So I think from my perspective, the most impactful thing we can do is to prioritize and commit to ending chronic homelessness in this city.
Thanks. Okay, Bruce, over to you.
You and I spoke recently about the return to downtown of workers, or the non-return of. And one of the ideas was to turn office buildings into residential, retail, and office, which makes sense, I guess. And if you talk to building owners, maybe it makes sense, but it's also a really expensive proposition. And so what's the city's role in that in terms of privately owned buildings?
Right. So it is exceptionally expensive to convert commercial space. So when we talk about affordable housing, sometimes it's easy to think, well, let's just convert all of this commercial space into affordable housing, and that's much less likely. But at the same time, we do need to turn our commercial sector into a more mixed-use center with retail, commercial. Won't necessarily maybe convert an entire building, but you could convert 3 or 4 floors. And I think there, maybe to your question, Taylor, earlier, is that, if we can provide, things like, building permits quicker, or for free, eliminate the charge for building permits, or that's how the city can be involved. We have examples. There's one on Slater near Bronson that's been converted. It's taken years, but it has been converted. But there are lessons learned from that. But yeah, absolutely. We've got also the federal government, part of their national housing strategy is money for conversions, for affordability. So, that is much more likely where any funding will come that will make it affordable for developers. Yeah.
You probably answered this question from Bruce when you talked about these kinds of issues or the future of the downtown. Would you be ordering civil servants for the city back into their offices at any point here, or is work from home just because that's what the feds are doing now, that's also what Ottawa would be doing?
The majority of our workforce is front-facing, right? So it's so they're back, mostly back.
I guess I'm thinking specifically about City Hall itself.
Right, yeah. But for people who have the ability to work from home, I believe that we will always have some form of a hybrid system. And I think that it does have advantages. It has some, for example, today you could hire somebody who's got a specific expertise who doesn't live in the city. But if they're able to do the job remotely, we can tap into that type of talent. We are going to see more and more people coming back into the office organically, but it will never go back to pre-COVID times, and we can't plan on that, because people now, they've seen that there is some work-life balance, even if it's, one day a week where they're able to work from home and, be at home with their kids rather than putting their kids in daycare and being able to work from home. They've seen those advantages, and I think that you have to consider it from the perspective also of people who work, and to keep them happy, and to keep a workforce that's well engaged and wants to work for you.
Do you think that city services have fallen off at all because of people not being working from their offices? The feds are saying, Treasury Board's saying, right, 2 days a week roughly is the guideline. Every department can decide what it wants to do. That all seems nice because people can be at home, daycare, blah, 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 and yet federal services have fallen into the pit. So something is not working there. From what you have observed with city services, do you think the same level and quality has been maintained with people working not in the office, with people working remotely?
Well, we'd have to parse that out a bit, right? Like, certainly in the midst of COVID, I don't think that, certainly it was much more difficult. Everybody was working from home. We weren't nearly as effective. Nobody was. No level of government was. Today, as we kind of work into that hybrid model, I don't see that there's a real negative effect on services. Most of what we do is in person, just by the nature of it being a municipal government. So yeah, I don't see services suffering as a result of hybrid. I see services suffering as a result of the lack of investment in services. But
Okay, last word to anyone here?
Quickly, you've made dozens of promises over the course of the campaign so far. Can you say at this point, do you have any specific plans for how you're going to hold yourself accountable to delivering on all of these?
Well, that's what 4 years later does. It's residents don't feel that you've been held accountable. You don't get reelected. But in the entire 4 years of my term, I have been, you've seen it through this campaign. I've committed to being transparent, accountable. I've put out my list of donors, people who have donated to my campaign. I'm the only mayoral candidate that has done so. I'll redo that again on the 20th. I've put out an entire costed plan, 4 years of costing, not just 2. And I have put out an entire plan on how that will, how we will achieve that. And going forward, absolutely, I think that my budget processes will be much more transparent, much more accountable. I know with city staff that those budgets are developed in July, and by the time they hit the council table and the public's eyes in October, it's everything is pretty well established. That won't happen under my term as a mayor. We will go out, we will consult, we will ensure that there is debate and discussion around what people are looking for and the needs of the entire city.
Okay, everyone's done. Anything you want to clarify, correct?
Can I really take this mug?
You can take the mug.
No, I'll leave the mug, but
No
can I
one's
really
ever
take
asked that.
That is an unusual request, I have to say, Councillor. You can take either or both of those objects.
I'll take this.
Right. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I did too as well.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.